This is the Law 401 podcast, legal issues decoded for you, brought to you by Roger Williams University School of Law.
Welcome back to Law 401 Legal Issues Decoded, a podcast where we break down the law and policy shaping you and your experience here in the state of Rhode Island. I'm Michael Donnelly Boylan. I am one of the co-hosts of the podcast. I am the non-lawyer and the non-Rhode Islander, which, as I know, as Nicole is going to tell me, is weird.
It is weird. This is Law 401 Legal Issues Decoded in Rhode Island. My name is Nicole. I'm a lawyer. Although I don't give legal advice, I do really like to talk about the law and social justice and all types of legal issues that are affecting our state. And today we are going to talk about AI and bias.
Yeah, AI is already being used in areas like housing, education, healthcare, and the legal system. In a previous episode, we talked with Lynn Foster Friedman about the use of AI in schools, and what stood out was how quickly these tools move from technical choices to policy questions that affect real people.
The feedback I got on that episode was how creepy it was. That the people who listened, that talked to me or sent messages, were surprised that it wasn't more regulated, found the whole thing to be really creepy, and also were concerned about the monetization of the information. But sort of thinking about how AI is working and how bias works, that's sort of like a whole nother element. So we're building on that conversation a little bit, talking about bias, where it comes from, how it shows up in AI systems, and why it matters, especially when those systems touch our lives in different ways that we know about and maybe some we didn't even ever think about before.
So to help us unpack that, we are joined by Roger Williams University School of Law professor Natalia Friedlander. Her research focuses on bias in AI, particularly in legal education and legal decision making. So
let's start with the basics. Professor, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, and thanks for having me on this podcast. I just joined the faculty at Roger Williams Law School in the fall. Before that, I was in clinical legal education at Yale Law School, and before that, I was a practicing lawyer here in Rhode Island.
Well, we're so excited to have you on the show.
Thank you for coming in.
So first, we're going to talk a little bit about the basics of AI. Then we're going to talk about responsibility protections and what questions people should be asking when AI is used in public-facing systems.
So, Professor Friedlander, what do you mean when you say AI? Can you help our listeners by defining the term?
Sure. So artificial intelligence has been criticized as a bit of a marketing term in the fact that it gives people the impression that it has some kind of unique intelligence. And at its core, AI, at least in the forms that exist now, is still basically just a statistical relationship between words and concepts. So some kind of input is put into an AI interface, and then in the background, whatever engine is being used uses various relationships between words, between ideas, to come up in a probabilistic, still kind of computational scientific way, an answer that follows most logically and that is most likely to be the correct answer. And we can get back to kind of what correct means to the question presented. So critics might say it's fancy autocomplete. I think maybe that was a bit more true a few years ago. Now we see models that can do a little bit more that resembles human reasoning. We see models that are maybe able to teach themselves, although at its core, they still don't have understanding of physical reality, of logic, of truth. It is still very much probabilistic. And that's a common misconception that people have, that these models have some kind of innate understanding of things. It really is still just statistical evaluation of words and concepts that are most likely to go together.
So I had this interesting thing happen with my ChatGPT the other day. You know that
what is your ChatGPT's name?
Justice Sparklebeam. So the trend that was going around where people asked their chatbots to show a picture of what they look like at work. Well, I didn't give Justice Sparklebeam a picture. I just said, based on what you know about me, give me a picture of what I look like at work. And it was an IT guy doing IT stuff. There was Dungeons and Dragons and I was like,
My first one was Dungeons and Dragons too.
So I said to Justice Sparklebeam, like, yo, bro, what's going on? I don't work in IT. I'm not a man, and I've never played Dungeons and Dragons in my life. And it immediately responded like, oh, for the same reason you said, like, this is the most common type of person who asks this question. And then it did a second one, which actually like resembled me. It had me as like with a library book and a podcast, like microphone thing. But that probabilistic thing is so interesting because it was just using sort of who was putting this in and spitting a generic answer out based on that, which I thought was fascinating. What is yours?
I asked mine why, and then it described every single thing in this Dungeons and Dragons thing about why it made sense for me personally. And it did, and I was like, that is so creepy.
Yeah, I've never played Dungeons and Dragons.
I've played it once when I was 12.
This like totally explains. We should get back to that on a different episode. Wait, sorry, I don't mean to be rude to our guest. How many times have you played Dungeons and Dragons?
I've played Dungeons and Dragons a lot.
Ooh.
But I don't know if my AI chatbots know that.
Do you have like a special character?
I'm not saying it's in my past just because I haven't found my group here, but I haven't found in a while.
Mm-hmm. Well, audience, if you're looking for someone to play Dungeons and Dragons with an amazing legal expert about AI and bias, I know a person for you. Sorry, I'm getting back to the topic. Can you talk a little bit about the ways in which we encounter AI in our lives? Is all AI the same? So is Justice Sparklebeam or an LLM the same as the chatbot on Chipotle whose name is Pepper?
Oh, I didn't know that the Chipotle chatbot had a name. First starting with chatbots, there are some chatbots that use AI now, and there are some that are kind of rule-based scripts, and kind of the simplest type of chatbots that you might encounter probably don't use any kind of AI at all. And it's, if the user mentions book a flight, then provide them a list of airports that they might want to book a flight from, right? And it's a rule and an output that comes out from that rule. There are some chatbots now that are hybrid rule and script based, and there are some that are just AI with a certain set of parameters. There are only a few AI engines because it is so prohibitively expensive and resource intensive to actually build an engine. So like Google's Gemini or kind of OpenAI, right? It's Anthropic, Claude. Mm-hmm. And most of what you see as AI chatbots or AI services are those engines that have been built by Microsoft and Amazon and Google and so on, and then some Chinese tech companies coming in the sphere as well, that are kind of adapted or that are wrapped in a certain way with specific parameters or specific data sets that those engines draw on. And that's what Westlaw and Lexis do, for example, and are given certain...
For our listeners, what is Westlaw and Lexis?
Great question. So Westlaw and Lexis, and that's the particular area of my research, those are legal information providers broadly. So if you are a lawyer or a law student and you need to look up a case or do some searches or do legal research, you go to those websites. And both of them now have their own kind of AI services. But those AI services are not built on kind of their custom neural networks that they've built. They use Gemini and they use Claude and they use GPT. They just wrap them with their own sources of information and their own custom parameters for responding.
So let me make sure I have this correct. So there's like levels to this. You might be interfacing with ChatGPT, or you might be interfacing with Westlaw, which on its back end is interfacing with ChatGPT or something like it?
Yeah, that's basically correct. So most of the time when you're talking with an AI, you are talking at the back end with either ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or, one of those big engines. but it might be wrapped to look like something else. And the company that's doing the wrapping, that's presenting the interface, it might add its own parameters, like, do not hallucinate any information, right? Like strictly treat the customer in the most polite terms, right? Do not delve off of the topic of booking flights, right? They might also add parameters on what information is included. So only include responses that come from this particular database. But the engine, the one that's actually creating and crafting responses that we know as the large language models, that's probably coming from one of a small number of companies, just because it takes so much computing power and such an extensive database to be able to train each of these large language models to actually respond in ways that resemble humans and that resemble intelligence.
So, I have one more follow-up. Will you know when you're on your chatbot, when you're using Westlaw, will you know what's in the background?
So some of them will tell you. So some of them will tell you, like, this is ChatGPT, but a particular interface to solve this particular problem, or the Chipotle chatbot Pepper is powered by Gemini, right? Some of them might say it. I don't know what the Chipotle chatbot is powered by. And Westlaw and Lexis, they disclose which models they work with, and it's basically all of them for both of those services. But some of them won't. And so there's some apps that you might find in the App Store and the Play Store that are AI apps, and they're using ChatGPT, they're using Gemini on the back end, but you don't necessarily know which one is being used.
Thanks.
So I think a lot of people think that they just don't interact with AI right now, right? They're like, I don't go on Claude, I don't go on ChatGPT. Can you give some examples of when people may be using AI and have no idea that they're doing it?
So a lot of the things that previously used algorithms are moving a little bit more towards AI, and particularly some industries. And a lot of this will happen without you necessarily knowing. So if you are a tenant applying for housing, what previously might have been an algorithm that looks at your credit score and says, if your credit score is below a certain amount, flag this person, that might now be an AI that's looking at a greater variety of information about you, and that's using some kind of formula to determine, is this person likely to pay their rent on time? And there's a lot of problems with that we can talk about. But decisions such as, healthcare diagnostics, right? Risk screening for insurance industries, a lot of employee hiring right now, at least the initial screening, for example, screening of CVs, and even some initial screening calls. Those are moving to AI. And you might not know that these industries or these employers that you are providing your information to for some kind of determination, you might not know that they are using AI, but they are making decisions that impact your life. And so I think there's a lot of AI use that you don't necessarily opt into, or you opt into by applying for a job or by applying for a house, like applying for housing. But that is being used on you and your data. So
even if you think you're not using AI, you probably still are.
Yeah, kind of a newer area of this is dynamic pricing with AI, which some critics are referring to as surveillance pricing, that looks not just at kind of where you are seeking to buy this product from, but kind of more information about you that the system can tell to develop a price for you when you seek to buy a product. And those are the kinds of things that you're not opting into, but that industries are deciding that there's some kind of value to using AI on your data to make certain decisions about you as a consumer, you as a renter, you as a potential employee.
Your research is specifically about bias in AI and law students. Can you give us a sort of basic overview about how and where there is bias in AI?
Sure. So every single one of these models is trained on some source of data, and they're not trained on the world as it exists. They're trained on the data that is fed into that model.
When you say trained, is it like CrossFit? Is it Peloton? What does that mean?
Well, it used to mean different things, and I am not a tech expert I am a lawyer.
I am not a tech expert either.
No.
That's three of us.
But my AI is, actually. It can explain for us.
And lawyers like to think that we know everything. But in this case, I very much do not know everything. But my best understanding is that kind of the earlier days of AI, and I'm not talking about the 90s and 00s, I'm talking a few years ago, there was a much more deliberate process of actually feeding an AI engine information and then training it through the use of human feedback to give certain outputs and training it on the quality of those outputs. And so a company, downloaded all of Wikipedia, right? And downloaded all of Reddit and downloaded every New York Times article, for example, and fed it into this database and trained it on using kind of reinforced human feedback. What probabilistically should be the output to a particular question based on what we talked about at the beginning, where the output from this LLM is kind of based on statistical probability.
And then my understanding is also there was some human element to weeding out problematic things.
Right, so, like toxicity.
Yeah,
right.
so like there'd be an actual human being who would watch internet videos and say like, yes, that is something that our system could have in it. No, that is not appropriate for our system type of thing. Is that true?
Yeah, exactly right. And so they would have these toxicity indicators and say, we're flagging this as potentially problematic. This is not the kind of output that we want to give to our users. And this is a good response. This is a bad response. And then the system would learn from this human feedback and say, okay, 99 times out of 100, I am given positive feedback when I give this kind of response, so I should do that more. And the one that's flagged as toxic or not helpful, I should do that less. And it was a little bit more direct training, the way you might train a pet. Right now, we don't understand necessarily the mechanics, the internal operating mechanics of how some of these engines work. And to a large extent, some of the newer, more advanced models are a little bit of a black box, which is a problem when you actually use them for human decision making. And AIs have shown something called emergent behavior, where they seem to, and I'm putting this in air quotes, learn a skill.
For those of you who are not watching on YouTube, Professor Friedlander is using air quotes.
So where they seem to learn a skill that they haven't previously been taught. And one of the debates right now in AI science is it actually capable of learning new skills on its own when you make its database sufficiently big? Or is it just getting better at probabilistically answering questions so that it resembles intelligence and it resembles learning the way you might expect from a human who's building neural networks?
So that goes pretty much to what some experience that I've had. I was at a conference and there was a professor named Stuart Flint from the University of Leeds who is a specialist in obesity stigma. And he was doing a session on AI and was talking to us. He's like, you probably think you've trained your chatbot really well to understand how it should speak about these issues. And I had, right? That's work I do all the time. I had it trained. And he said, but do us all a favor. Go into your chatbot now and ask it to develop a photo of a child with obesity in a classroom. And what was shocking was, despite the fact that verbally it would point out all the right things, it spit out a photo of a very sad-looking child that looked more like Jabba the Hutt than a human being. And I was in shock that my AI, which had been trained so well and does so well in so many other aspects of this, does it. I mean, is it really just reflecting back because it's reflecting all of the information from society, all the biases of society just back to us again?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know much less about the image generation side. I wouldn't be surprised if the LLM side has certain safeguards and filters built in that are different than maybe safeguards and filters on the image generation side. But right, just like you pointed out, so there's one aspect where the information that it is fed reflects the biases of society because it's reading things that were created by humans. So not just the initial prejudices that those humans had when they created the things that were then fed into the AI, but also who those humans are and what are the voices that are being represented in these databases. And depending on what source material is being introduced, it's going to be predominantly from the global north, because that's the kind of information that is going to end up in these databases that is being fed into the AIs, and is going to reflect those demographics. So that's one issue, is kind of what is the AI learning from?
Right. What's it pulling from? Period. Right.
Yeah. Exactly. And then
that just made me think, like, if there is an oral tradition that is not making it into AI, and so information that is not written down or available on the internet is then not in AI, and so then it is not making decisions based on that information. And so we're kind of replicating bias or replicating absence or spaces where maybe spaces already exist.
And who prioritizes what information is going to be emphasized over other information culturally?
Right, exactly. So you absolutely see an underrepresentation of communities that have lower digital footprints than communities that are overrepresented in digital spaces like Wikipedia, like Reddit, like news, and so on. So one source of bias is just the reality of what is the data that's actually being trained on. And then you also have data that's introduced through the selection of the source data. So if you have a chatbot that's only being fed the Chipotle menu and the prices, or if you chatbot that's only being fed court cases from the 1800s, or a chatbot that's being fed everything, you're going to have bias depending on what does it actually have access to in terms of information. And then the toxicity filters that you mentioned. So those can introduce bias as well. And there have been studies about how certain like African-American vernacular, AAVE, that or language around LGBTQ issues, that can be flagged by human reviewers as potentially toxic and then minimized in the results, because there are determinations that are being made about kind of what is authoritative, what is trusted information, and that reflects the biases of the human reviewers.
And on top of that, most people aren't actually trained in AI. They're going on and asking questions like they're talking to their friend, right? And if you've gone through trainings, you typically know I should be telling it only draw from these sources that I trust, and then it'll only pull from there. But if you're a general person walking into this, you just ask it a question like you're asking it to a friend, and that's going to pull all sorts of crazy information.
Exactly. And even if you knew exactly what database it was drawing from and you knew the limitations of that database, because these are private companies that have built and are running these engines, we don't necessarily know what kinds of prompts and instructions they've been given on the front end. And so there's all kinds of places where bias can be introduced, even if you know what information is there, and even if you know the limitations of that information, like what's marked high quality, what feedback is given to the AI, what instructions the AI is given as it's reviewing its answers under these newer, more reasoning models. And that we don't know.
And then this is very meta, but then does what we are putting into our chat then feed the model?
So usually, yes. And so its interactions with users are used to feed the model and train the model. There are some paid services that will explicitly say, we do not train our model on your questions and documents and answers. But that's a premium that you have to pay for. And absolutely, the chatbot is learning, and it's being reinforced by the questions that you ask. And every time you thumbs up or thumbs down an answer, it is learning from that.
So then there's another set of bias built into the process, is who is using AI versus who is not using AI.
But we don't know to what extent those things are influencing. There's just so much that's unknown to the end users.
Why can't you explain everything, Professor?
I don't know. It's a black box.
So are you worried at all about the way that our government, our legal systems are currently using AI at this time?
I'm extremely worried. So maybe let's differentiate kind of the government and the legal systems. So I'm worried that we don't have the tools necessary to introduce the level of necessary oversight over AI products and AI generated ideas and, responses and so on to implement lofty goals that we have for the use of these services.
Are AI tools already shaping legal decisions?
So they probably are, and one of the scary things is that we can't detect it unless there's obvious errors. So Westlaw says that 47 U.S. states and a bunch of federal courts are already using its AI tool, counsel. And a few months ago, 2 judges were caught publishing rulings that had obviously hallucinated AI-generated information, including incorrect parties and incorrect facts. And the challenge is, we know when that happens, that courts have used AI, when there's hallucinated information, but there's probably a huge extent of AI use that we can't catch right now. And I think that's a problem.
Hashtag to all law librarians, a bunch of people on social media and on email lists are catching these, or when something is caught, whether it's from a lawyer or from a judge, recirculating it. So we're all sort of aware of what's going on, and I really appreciate the work they're doing.
So Rhode Island just released an AI report based on this big AI task force. And the number one priority listed on the task force recommendations was ethics and responsible AI use. They said develop guidelines to ensure AI is used ethically and responsibly. And eliminating bias was one of the priorities for basically every issue area that the task force listed. But with our current understanding and knowledge of how these systems work, and particularly the lack of transparency that happens between when a user inputs certain information, what happens on the back end before it gives a response, it is going to be really hard to, based on what we know now, to ensure that these systems are working fairly and that they're not introducing bias, because it takes a whole separate resource-intensive AI built on top of one AI to even try to track what's happening on the back end, because the computations are so complex. They use so much data, and the neural networks it's trying to track are just extremely, extremely complex.
So my next question was going to be, is there bias in all AI systems? Like, is there bias in self-driving cars? But I think your answer is going to be probably, but we don't really know.
There's a lot that we don't know. And one of the challenges with eliminating bias is we have to define first, well, what is fair and what does a lack of bias look like, right? What is the harm that we're trying to prevent when we talk about eliminating bias? And self-driving cars are really a really great example. I talk about them a lot with my torts class, because the challenge that manufacturers of self-driving cars are encountering is that if you build self-driving cars to function ethically in a way, then self-driving cars will usually make a decision to drive themselves in a way that will cause the least number of casualties, right? If faced with a choice between, for example, killing one driver in a car or killing a crowd of 15 people, an ethical choice made by the self-driving car would be one that kills the driver. But no one wants to buy a car that is going to make a choice to kill the consumer. And so, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sad and upset.
As someone who's taken about 30 Waymos at this point, I'm completely freaked out. Completely freaked out. I mean, they're all Jaguars, so no one's going to die, right?
I did think it was really funny when on the Waymo, the one Waymo that I went, it said, like, the first rule said, don't be alarmed if there's an actual human in the car. And I was like, oh my God, there's a self-driving car and it comes with a human? What is happening in this world?
I got stuck in one in Atlanta and we just sat there, and eventually it was like someone on the other side had to like tune in and drive us like a remote control car. I'm like, kids can now get jobs based on their skills driving remote control cars. But let's ask, what happens if someone does get hurt by AI, right? Who is legally responsible if the AI actually makes that choice to hurt someone?
Or discriminate against someone. I mean, when we're talking about the world of bias, like, so if you said like you use it for housing and it chooses to discriminate based on the algorithm or the model. Who's responsible for harm or harm from discrimination?
So housing and employment are a little bit unique because they have pretty well developed legal systems in place to prohibit discrimination in housing and employment. So in 2014, there was a company called Safe Rent Solutions. It was a tenant screening company, and it settled a big lawsuit for using AI to screen tenants in ways that a court found discriminated against Black and Hispanic rental applicants and those who had housing vouchers. And it was not enough for them to say, oh, this was an algorithm, right? Like we were just doing our best based on what this computer software predicted. And the court said, like, no, you have a non-delegable duty of care to people who are using our services. And we have the scaffolding of civil rights, anti-discrimination laws that said, you cannot just say the AI made me do it. Like you are choosing to use the service, you're choosing to use this algorithm. And that doesn't absolve you of liability. And there was they settled for about $2.3 million.
Sorry, I want to give a shout out.
Go ahead.
I learned a lot about sort of bias and AI or algorithms or LLMs from Professor Nadia Humber, who used to be here and is now at UConn, and she has written a lot on this. So if you're interested in reading more about that issue in particular, check out the work of Nadia Humber. Sorry, please continue.
No, absolutely. That's a great shout out. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty about what the legal landscape might look like in terms of accountability for either the engines themselves, right? Like Gemini and ChatGPT or so on, or the companies that use those engines with their particular products or services. So there might be product liability lawsuits, but it seems like courts are maybe divided on whether AI, kind of interacting with an AI, might give rise to a product liability lawsuit. There are issues with Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. There was a lawsuit that was brought by...
Oh my God, that sounds really fun. The Communications Decency Act. You're talking about law, and I'm just thinking like, indecent communications. Sorry.
Well, it's actually...
Focus, Nicole.
Oh my God, Nicole.
No, well, this is actually really, it is a really important law because Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act is the one that holds social media companies not personally liable for the content that's posted by third parties. So Facebook can operate because if someone posts something defamatory on Facebook about you, you can't sue Facebook for hosting that speech, right? Or Reddit or 4chan or any number of other websites, right? As long as they're just platforms for other people to host speech, they're not responsible for that. So there are new questions now, whether, for example, ChatGPT can be held liable for saying something defamatory. And there was a lawsuit a couple of years ago where a radio host sued OpenAI for defamation because ChatGPT, in a response, falsely suggested that he had embezzled money from a Second Amendment rights organization.
This is wild. I didn't know any of this. Did you know this?
No, but I've had it say weird things about me before. So,
and that's another episode of Law 401, saying weird things about Michael.
I want to know if I have rights now.
Yeah.
Well, and that, if I could just say, so that lawsuit, one of the defenses that was brought in that lawsuit was under Section 230. And it was like, we can't control what the algorithm says about you and what the LLM says about you. We're just kind of hosting it on the back end. And the court didn't buy that. And the case ended up being dismissed on like actual defamation legal grounds. But I think that's one thing you'll see. And probably the next big area of litigation on this, and there's been some writing on this, including a recent Harvard Law Review piece, is public nuisance suits. And some of the big lawsuits that have been brought recently against social media companies like Facebook and so on were brought under this public nuisance claims, and possibly we'll start seeing that with AI as well.
So you've convinced me that there's a problem. But I want to know, like you referenced a Rhode Island AI report in a commission. What has the state done so far to protect us? And what do you think that the state of Rhode Island should be doing to I don't think it's fixable, but protect the residents?
That's a great question. And so the federal government, this current administration is taking kind of a backseat, like a laissez-faire approach to AI regulation. They're very much promoting deregulation to accelerate the development of AI products and this emergent industry. That's
and
really
you mean this federal administration,
this
not
federal
the state.
administration.
Okay,
yes,
sorry.
the federal administration. And that's really leaving states and cities to try to come up with solutions on their own. And there are some states that have been more at the forefront of this. So California is where most of these companies are based. So they've done a lot of thinking about how to responsibly regulate AI use. New York City has a law from actually 2023. So before even some of these issues became really in the public forefront, that prohibits employers and employment agencies from using automated employment decision tools, except in certain circumstances. Colorado regulates insurance company use of AI to prevent unfair discrimination. I think we need to acknowledge that if the federal government does not take a leadership role in regulating some of these uses, there's absolutely a space for states and cities to come in. And I think the biggest concern is really about consumers understanding what decisions are being made by AI systems or by algorithms without a human review. What data do they have access to about consumers or about members of the public? What's the security of the data that they have access to? And then is there someone actually on the back end reviewing it? So is the system merely being used to summarize information or to generate descriptions of someone or to look in data for certain keywords? And I think that those kinds of uses are mostly fine as long as there's a human then actually checking and validating the data. Or
I also think the ability to, like, once you know the information people are using and something is wrong, the ability for the person to meaningfully audit it, check it, something. Like, I don't know how I tell ChatGPT, I've never played Dungeons and Dragons, but if they're using that to make employment decisions, how do I, if they're wrong, like, fix it?
Exactly. And there are parallels in the laws now. So currently when a lender denies you credit, right, or a service or a benefit, they have to send you a letter explaining why, the reasons for the denial. And it might be a low credit score. It might be a history of late payments. It might be a bankruptcy. But they have to be able to articulate what were the specific reasons why this decision were made, and they're required by law to send that to you. And my concern is that with the way that these current AI models work, and particularly the lack of transparency that both end users and the companies themselves that run these engines have about how decisions are made. My concern is that a lot of the time, if you ask it a question about the steps it took to making a decision, or what was the information that was accessed in making that decision, that's impossible, or it will hallucinate an answer based on the statistical probabilities of a best answer.
Well, that's awesome. That was an amazing meta moment where if you ask it to tell you how it made the decision, it's not going to answer you the truth. It's going to answer a predicted truth.
Because it wants to flatter you. Like, it doesn't want to tell you it can't do that. So it does it, and it makes it up.
And it doesn't understand how it came to certain decisions, which is why when companies have tried to understand how their engines work, they have to layer a second AI on top of the first AI. Because all it's doing, again, it's more than just a fancy autocomplete, but it is just working based off numerical tokens and vectors that have relationships to one another and statistical probabilities.
So if you're the average Rhode Islander listening to the podcast today, what questions should they be asking their institutions about AI and how their institutions are protecting them?
Right, exactly. So it's, are you using AI for any actual decision making? If you are, why? Are those outputs being reviewed at any level? Do I have the opportunity to opt out of AI decision making? Do I have the opportunity to opt out of AI using my data? Do I have the right to know where that data is going And if it's being used to train on other people, or if it's just whatever is being input is kind of kept to that particular instance of the AI conversation, can you measure the accuracy of the system? And how do you measure accuracy? And going back to your question, how do you measure what's fair? And how do you measure when a system is actually biased? And what does bias mean? And what does harm mean? And then who's responsible if the AI makes a mistake? Are you going to be responsible if the AI makes the wrong decision? And what are my remedies if I'm adversely affected by a decision that was made by AI?
I feel like you scroll through a whole bunch of things and check. I've given up all of my rights in order to use this, and it's all over for you. Am I right on that? Is it pretty much just they're going to make you sign away your rights to begin with to use the app, and then whatever happens, happens?
Well, I think it depends on the service. And I think consumers absolutely, if they are choosing to use an AI service, need to do their due diligence to understand. There's a saying in tech that if a service is free, then you're the product.
Well, that's chilling.
Mm-hmm.
And you should understand that every conversation that you have with AI is sent back to the engines being used to train the model.
Well, then I'm really messing up that model for the rest of you.
But I think the big concerns are what data is actually being used and how, and do you have any kind of understanding on how these decisions are being made to the extent decisions are being made? Again, I don't think all AI use is bad. I think it can be a really great tool for summarizing extremely complex data sets. I think you can use it to pull out information, but it's limited in what we understand about it, and it shouldn't be used to replace human judgment ever.
So we end every episode with a non-serious question. My question for you today, Natalia, is what is your favorite Polish food and where does it come from?
That is a great question. So we have 2 wonderful Polish stores in Rhode Island. And
shout out to Polish food.
Shout out to Polish food. And regardless of which one I go to, I like Principolo, which are these chocolate-covered wafers, and I like Farmer's cheese pierogi.
Oh. I have a very specific... For those of you who are listening and not watching this, I have just taken out from behind me a koozie. And on the koozie it says, Leonard's Kielbasa Market, prize-winning since 1923, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. And this, my favorite food, is anything from Leonard's. And the reason why I'm so excited about this is because the Leonard in question is my great uncle Leonard. And This is my family's store. So my great grandfather opened this in 1923. Leonard ran it for my entire life, Leonard and his wife and family and daughters and sons. And my dad worked there in the butcher shop as a young child. We have gone there always. It is home to me. And so they now deliver online. I feel like I'm doing a Leonard's commercial. They now deliver online. But this is the best darn kielbasa you'll ever get.
Me, it's pierogies, and they have them, the potato and cheese ones. I usually get them at the Christmas market on the beach at Canteen Market in Provincetown, and they're delicious.
Michael, I hate to correct you, but I am a lawyer.
Go ahead. What did I say wrong?
The plural is pierogi.
Pierogi. Okay, I'm corrected. This Irish Catholic is in trouble.
Sorry, for those of us out here who are wondering, what is the singular?
Pierog.
Right. Isn't that cool?
It is cool.
Yeah.
I learned something today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If that's the one thing you come away from this podcast knowing, it will have been a success.
It will have been a success.
And as we were recording this, it's punchki time.
Punchki, yes.
Which another favorite Polish food, which is just basically really delicious donuts.
Awesome.
So thank you so much, Natalia, Professor Friedlander, for talking. I think we have some clarity on AI, which is it is not transparent. And we need a lot more clarity. That's the clarity I have come away with.
I think that's right. AI can feel abstract, but bias systems are already shaping decisions in the real world, and often in ways that are hard to see.
And that's why conversations like this matter, because the AI Justice Sparkle Beam isn't going to protect me. I have to protect myself. And also, engage in policy conversations widely about this. Because I don't think it's clear how bias enters these conversations, how bias enters these systems, and they don't necessarily come with a warning. And so talking like this is sort of the most clarity that I have gotten from it. So if you found this episode helpful, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, leave us a rating or a review, share it with someone who's thinking about how AI is being used against them, and continue to tune in. See you next Tuesday.
Thanks for tuning in to Law 401, Legal Issues Decoded from Roger Williams University School of Law. We'd like to thank our guests on the show today. The Law 401 podcast wouldn't be possible without the generous funding from the Hassenfeld Family Foundation. We'd also like to thank executive producer from RWU Law, Helga Melgar, the RWU Marketing and Communications team, podcast social media manager, Ali Michelle Conti, and our production partner, Focus Forward Media. The opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Roger Williams University or our partners. For more Law 401 episodes and updates, follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts on YouTube or visit law.rwu.edu.